groups and teams. And probably the thing that you'll be doing most at work is working in some form of a group. Today I wanted to look at this last part, which is really looking at some of the challenges of groups. Okay, what is it that comes about when you put groups together? What are some of the problems? Well, a real problem is, if we look at this stage again, this graphic again, people refuse to share ideas, don't talk about their issues, don't talk about their concerns. If that's a problem, then we get into a communication issue, and we're really end up like hiding conflicts or not resolving conflicts. And these failures will show up in the output of the group. There's also looking to the leader too much. If one person a weight is on one person, everyone's looking to that one. The others tend to kind of shirk off any responsibility. You don't have this team effect, because teams, there is no real leader per se. Everybody contributes. And if one person is looked to as the head, the others may end up falling behind. And the problem is with groups, if they get too big, you end up with subgroups. So you end up with little cliques. Another thing that forms with groups that has an effect on its overall challenge is these group norms. And norms develop in a group as the group forms and storms and moves into norming. At the very first class, I talked about the issue of, again, going back to this Lord of the Flies. And we saw group norms come into place. And when we saw group norms, they weren't necessarily all good. The groups would fight against one another. They had to have the conch in order to speak, and they got competitive and these sorts of things. So the norm, sometimes norms can be really good. People agree not to call one another names, and the norm is that, or the norm is everyone dresses appropriately for the job. Or the norm is everybody shows up early and works late. Or the norm is that people always give 110%. Whatever we consider the norm to be, the norm has the potential to be good, but it also could be bad. We're all slack, and we like being slack, and as a result, nothing's going to get done. That type of norm is a negative norm. So individuals tend to have to comply with the norms. If you stand out, if you're like the nail that is stuck up a little bit in the group, you're going to get hammered down. So, groups are very powerful in the terms of enforcing norms. So what we want to do is to make sure that the norms are positive, and that those positive norms are enforced, not negative, and those negative norms being enforced. So typical norms would include things like dress, how rewards are allocated. Everyone understands that if you do a really good job, you get a pay increase. The norm has been. If you recall, I go back to Chevy Chase in A Christmas Vacation, and you think about in that movie, he was supposed to get a bonus. He figured he was going to get a bonus, and he was going to put it in the pool. And that was the whole premise of the movie, is that he was waiting for this to come, and it never came. The norm was that was the case. And when his brother went off and got that guy, the boss, and dragged him out to Chevy's house, the boss was kind of repentant, saying, "Yeah, I should have continued with the reward system." People get used to it. So formal rewards are pay and promotion. Informal rewards could be just as simple as a pat on the back. But generally, those norms are in place in organizations to encourage people to do the things that need to be done. And when we think about norms, we think of equity, being treated fairly, equality, everyone feeling respected and equal, reciprocity, which is I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. So if I give more, I'm going to get more. And social responsibility, they're going to do the right thing. In terms of performance norms deal with how much production we do. If we're in a production environment, I got to do 20 pieces a day. Well, the norm is that 20 pieces a day. If I go above the norm, I'm doing more, and the group may not look too well on that. Or if I'm doing worse, I'm doing less, the group may not look too well on that either. We also talk about group roles, and people take on certain roles within the groups. Now, these roles tend to fall into two categories. There's roles that are assigned to them. So you are, you're in the group. I assign you the job of the safety coordinator. Okay, that's an assigned role. You're the safety coordinator. So it's a formal company designated role that you're going to have, and you'll put it on your business card and you'll put it in your emails. I'm the safety coordinator, and you're responsible for all things in that. Now, that's not too bad, but sometimes roles are not defined. And as the group rolls along, we see tasks that need to be done that people just pick up and do. Let's say, for example, someone is artistic. Okay, someone's artistic and they're really good at drawing diagrams. Well, over time, we look to that person to draw the diagrams. They've shown that they can do this really well. That person suddenly becomes the diagram drawer person. Not because they were assigned a role, it's just they kind of evolved into it. So emergent roles are roles that develop naturally to meet the social emotional needs of the group. You always think of the mothering type in the organization, or the typical slouch in the organization. Oh, we always think Jimmy's the problem child. Yeah, everyone knew he was. So that's what's called an emergent role. One of the biggest problems that I've seen, and this is a real problem in organizations. You might have run into it yourself. I know I have run into it. There's something called role ambiguity, where you're not really absolutely what your role is or clear on your role. And role ambiguity comes about because of these emergent roles as much as anything. Let's assume that you're designated a role, you're an instructor, or you're the person that makes the graphics or that sort of thing. But the question is, over time, you take on more roles because of the emergent system. And even though it's not officially your role, you're doing it, and then someone has that role. You don't know if it's their responsibility, your responsibility, these sorts of things. So role ambiguity exists when the goals of one's job or methods of performing it are really unclear. And that's a management problem, right? That's something managers need to be aware of. We need to be crystal clear on what people's roles are. So ambiguity includes confusion about how the performance is going to be evaluated, how good performance can be achieved, what are the limits of one's authority, and what is one's responsibility. These are the things that start to happen when we end up with these informal roles coming about. Now, the flip of that is that unless you allow these informal roles to happen, it's a very stiff organization. I'm only a welder. That's all I do. I don't do anything else besides welding. That creates these kind of silos that people fall into. So it is an ongoing problem in either direction. We either create hard silos and we have very little role ambiguity, or we allow people to kind of evolve, which is good for them, but not so good for the organization, and not too good for them when they're ambiguous with regards to what the roles are. So a lot of these things occur in organizations, and oftentimes it's the organization that's at fault for this happening. And we talk about organizational factors. Some roles seem inherently ambiguous because of their function in the organization. We talk about a role sender, might be unclear about the expectations. The boss tells you to do something, but you're not really clear what the boss was asking. That's what we mean by role sender issues. So it's communication breakdown from the boss to you. And the role expectations might not fully be digested by the focal person. So you might not understand. So the boss may not be good in communicating, but you may not be good in understanding. So there's two layers that can cause problems. You don't understand, they don't tell you properly. So the practical consequences of role ambiguity include job stress, job dissatisfaction, reduced organizational commitment, and sometimes if it gets really bad, people say, I'm going to leave. So managers need to be able to reduce this role ambiguity. They need to be on top of this stuff. What is it people's roles are? Make it clear to them. Make it clear what the performance expectations are. And make it clear with performance feedback. So it requires active management. Here's what you should do. Oh, that's a really good job. You should do more of that. You should do less of that. These sorts of things come into play in terms of a good management. Sometimes groups run into this role conflict. You know, if you got a group of people as opposed to individuals, so role conflict can exist either in a person or in a group. And, you know, several different types of role conflict, and we've just really touched on it at the beginning. Intra-sender role conflict, which is a single sender provides incompatible role expectations to a role occupant. So one person basically says something that causes you to think that I'm not clear on what I'm supposed to do. Okay, so it's a single person. Inter-sender role conflict occurs when two or more people provide a role with incompatible expectations. So intra is one person, inter tends to be two people. And one of the basic premises of management is that you can only have one boss. Okay? If you had two bosses, let's assume boss one comes over and tells you to do something, and boss two comes over and tells you to do something totally different. You can't please either one of them, right? So this is really what we're looking at with inter-sender role conflict, is whenever you end up with a couple of bosses. So that's why this fundamental rule in business is one supervisor. And we got inter-role conflict too, when several roles collide. Okay, you're expecting me to answer phone, but you're also expecting me to type up this letter. I can't do both, but the phone's always ringing. That's a problem. You know, if you have both of those roles and they're in conflict with one another. And a person role conflict occurs when the role demands call for behavior that's incompatible with your personality. If you don't like talking on the phone and you've been asked in your job to be the person who talks on the phone, you're not going to be happy. That's not something that's going to appeal to you. So what organizations need to do is recognize that this role conflict problem, be it individual role conflict or group role conflict, causes problems in their workers. It leads to job satisfaction, it leads to stress, it leads to lower organizational commitment, and it can eventually, in worst case scenarios, lead to people leaving. So managers can help prevent role conflict by avoiding self-contradictory messaging. Be clear. Confer with the role sender. So be confirming. Make sure you understand. If you're going to tell someone to do something, make sure they understand what you're asking them. Ask them questions, you know. Be sensitive to multiple role demands. Okay, I recognize you're answering the phone. I recognize that you've got to type that letter. It's going to take time. It is not going to happen in 5 minutes because you've got multiple things to do. And the other thing is making sure you fit the right person in the right role. We've talked about already in organizational behavior the need to consider different personalities and you know, diversity in workers. Certain people with certain personalities are good for certain types of jobs. That's what we've already determined in this course. And making sure that you put the right type of person in a job is important. We think of different types of roles in the job, you know, and what is it that people need to do? Well, there's a certain type of role called initiating, which is starting this is your job. That's the initiating, you know, starting the goal or problem, making proposals about how the work is going on, setting time limits. So let's set up an agenda for discussing each of the problems we have to consider. So this is the type of thing. So the boss would sit down with you in order to minimize role problems, role ambiguity, initiating it. You know, what are some of the things that are here? Seeking information and opinions, asking group members for specific factual information related to their task. Tell me about your problem. So what do you think would be the best approach? Is a classic example of managing that. Performing information and providing information and opinions. You know, sharing information is a critical one. That's communication. I worked on a similar problem last year and found that's always a useful tool. Clarifying, helping one another understand ideas and suggestions that come out. So that's just like paraphrasing, you know. So what you're saying, Sue, is elaborating, fleshing it out a bit, you know, building on Don's idea. I think we could. Summarizing, so what you're telling me is. And consensus testing. So are you telling me from a group point of view, this one works, you know, It's kind of assessing the situation or summarizing the situation. Is that what we're agreeing to? So is the group ready to decide about this? These are typical things that are done in order to help clarify and minimize any of these role conflicts that go on. So, there's a bunch of terminologies here. I just want to say that, harmonizing, compromising, gatekeeping, and encouraging are typical tools that managers use in order to allow people to come up with a clear, concise goal. So harmonizing is mediating conflict amongst members. So let's talk this out. Don, I think you and Sue really need to see the question differently. Or, admitting errors. Gatekeeping means making sure all members have a chance to express their ideas. So just making sure everyone has their say, and encouraging. And that one's pretty self-explanatory. Okay. So now another big problem that comes out about group, and one of the challenges that managers need to be aware of, is something called status. Status is, we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This idea of, we got our base level needs, and we got our need for safety, and we got our need for involvement or dealing with people, and then we got our need for status. And status is one of the higher level needs in Maslow's hierarchy. And as people fulfill their needs, remember, they're going to be looking to the next highest level to look for. So you're in a group, you're going to probably want to increase your rank in the group or your profile in the group. It's typical human behavior. So status is rank, social position, or prestige according to the group members. It represents the group's evolution of a member and evaluation of a member. Organizations have both formal and informal status systems. So formal status, if you think about formal status, that's something that's provided by the work. It's management's attempt to publicly identify those people that have higher status, okay? And we think about that, and this includes titles, work relationships, pay package, work schedule, corner office, the physical work environment. The bosses are always in the corner office. Okay, so you've made it up in the world when you get this. Status symbols might include all of these things. And the question is, what is the criteria for achieving these formal systems? It needs to be really well laid out. What do you need to do in order to do well? What is that management value? Informal status systems really exist in this informal environment. Job performance is based on the acquisition of informal status. So a good hitter or a good performer will be accorded status, although status symbols might be lacking. So, people who are smart or quick or can use the computer or know how to use a website or know how to search on Google, those people, even though they may not have a high status in the organization, people go to them because they know how to operate it and they know how to do it. They're people who know the ropes to skip and the ropes to know. Status, though, gives some challenges. The higher the status or a different status can cause real problems, and it will affect the way people communicate. People just generally don't like speaking to or reluctant to speak to people higher status. It's just a natural human thing. So will you talk to the boss? The boss has power, discipline power, control power over you, and you're always a bit reluctant. There's a status issue there. Most people like to communicate with others at their own status level. That's the thing. And sometimes you don't like dealing with people down below you. Okay. And higher status people tend to have more influence. So what do we do to reduce status barriers? A lot of organizations have dealt with this over the last few years. And, if we think about the cubicle office was designed to eliminate these status barriers. It created problems all in of itself because nobody has an office anymore, so there's no status per se. So although status differences can be powerful motivators, status differences also tend to inhibit free flow of communication in an organization, or can make it more difficult to foster a culture of teamwork and cooperation. Many organizations are doing away with status symbols such as executive dining rooms, reserved parking, and attempting to foster a culture of teamwork and cooperation. Same thing with offices. Use of email is also found to level status barriers, thus facilitating communications between people at higher levels. Another thing looks at group cohesiveness. And the cohesiveness is how well the group works together. How sticky are they in terms of a single entity? Are they truly a team, or are they just a bunch of individuals? So group cohesiveness is critical for most groups. Cohesive groups are those that are especially attracted to members. Members are especially desirous of staying in a group that tend to describe themselves in favorable terms. We're the pretty people group. Everybody wants to be in the pretty people group, right? So that's what we consider to be the things that help make it cohesive. So there are several important factors that make one group more cohesive than the other. And it's interesting that some of these factors come within inside the group or from outside the group. And probably one of the biggest factors that stick a group together more than anything else comes from outside, and it's called the threat of competition, or the threat in general, as opposed to anything in particular. But if there's an external threat, someone from outside is coming in to take us over, get rid of us, challenge us, whatever, the group as an entity will circle the wagons to protect itself. So because of this, the group gets more cohesive. So a threat of competition can force members to work together and goals. So oftentimes what companies do is they pit one group against another, not in a negative way, but in a positive way. Years ago, for example, it probably still happens, but during the Cold War, companies like Lockheed, now Lockheed made airplanes, okay? So if you want to think about what Lockheed do, a lot of the planes that they made were military planes. And Lockheed came up with a group, a team, and that group was called the Skunk Works, just like a skunk. Anyway, it wasn't a very good name, but effectively what Skunk Works was a small group of engineers who were given the resources, the time, the energy, and operated more or less independent to create some of the best airplanes ever built, some most technologically advanced airplanes ever built. And the system worked really, really, really well. And one of the things that made it work so well is that there were many different skunk work groups within Lockheed that were often competing with one another. So for example, to build an airplane, they probably had 2 or 3 groups set up that were building 3 different types of airplanes that would do effectively the same thing. And at the end of it, one of those airplanes would be selected as the airplane they would use or put forward to the military and develop. So there was always this threat of competition amongst the groups, intergroup competition. One of the biggest internal motivators of any group is success. If a group does really well, the members feel pride. And if they feel pride, that kind of binds the group together. And we also got things like member diversity. Diversity is important, but on the other hand, it also means that the members are different. So once the group is successful and they accomplish something, it brings those diverse group of members together, even though they're a different bunch, like the crowd in the Breakfast Club. Even though they're a different bunch, they have something in common that brings them together. We've already talked about group size. So if the group gets too big, it runs into some problems. And another interesting one is, and again, internal but external as well, is something called the toughness of the initiation. For some reason or another, over the last number of years, and it has to do with civility, over the last number of years, this idea of group initiation has come under a big gun. I know in Clarendon High School, for example, and this is before your time, I don't know if it still goes on, but Clarendon High School, there used to be an initiation for the grade 9s as they'd come into school. And it really got out of hand. I was on the school board and it got out of hand. People got hurt and the like. It was ridiculous what was going on. And the school put an end to it. To my knowledge, it doesn't happen anymore. But why was that done? And just like when I was in university, you live in residence, there was froshing. It was awful to go through, but why was it done? Well, the idea was in all these groups, if there's an initiation into the group, you got to do something stupid to get into the group or to be part of the group or to be accepted into the group. Could be humiliating, could be crazy, could be ridiculous. But the fact of the matter is, once you've done it, you become suddenly invested in the group. And that's why initiation ceremonies used to happen. We don't see it too much anymore, but it still happens out there. And this toughness of the initiation, usually the worse the initiation is, the more cohesive the group gets. It's a club. It becomes a private club that's very hard to get into. And once you get into it, you're going to stay into it. So that's the basic way that helps. That works. So we also look at this, we've already talked about this, the consequences of cohesiveness. You got more participation in group activities. That's common in the workplace. If it's not a cohesive group, they don't participate in the group activities. More conformity. You don't have people going off and doing their own thing. People tend to work together. It often leads to more success, particularly from a positive point of view. And it could lead to more productivity. In other words, we get more out for the amount of input. So productivity often grows. Now, okay, so those are some of the positive things, but here's another interesting little tidbit about groups. And that's something called social loafing. So social loafing is from an individual perspective within the group, okay? So you are someone in the group. So social loafing is the tendency to withhold physical or intellectual effort when performing a group task. So basically you become a slacker. And why did that happen? Well, it happens for any number of reasons. People become disengaged from the group. People are just tired of the group. People disagree with the group, these sorts of things. So there's a couple of things that come about because of social loafing that affects the group. First of all, is a free rider effect. Now, you've gone and done this. You've been in school. You worked in groups. And there's always one person in the group that doesn't do very much. And that is what's called the free rider effect, okay? Somebody's there, going to get the same mark as you, yet you're working your tail off to get the project done. They're sat down twiddling their thumbs, and at the end of it, you're going to get an 80 in it, and they're going to get an 80 in it. How do you feel about that person, right? So people lower their effort to get a free ride at the expense of the group members. And this phenomena is just people not pulling their weight. And this can cause serious group issues. It breaks the group norms. A group norm should be that everybody contributes. And if not everyone's contributing, that's going to cause some problems, and the group will put pressure on that person to do their work. Now, from the flip of that, if you're the free rider, we're talking, we look out at the group doing the work, and we're sat down there twiddling our thumbs. This is what's called the sucker effect, and people lower their effort because they feel that others are free riding, and that is they're trying to not work their tails off because nobody else is. Why should I? So this is trying to restore this equity in the group. The group, there's pressure on the group to conform to the norms. So let's create a new norm of doing very little. So what do managers do with social loafing? It is a problem. It is a problem in every group. Well, some of the best ways to handle it is to make the individual performance within the group more visible. If you're shown as not doing, it's clear that you did not do your job. The pressure is going to be on you to do your job. Okay. So small groups, that's easily done. When you get larger and you just become a cog in the wheel, harder to do that sort of stuff. So it's a good reason to keep the group small. Make sure the work is interesting. If people are not interested, if it's boring work, no one's going to be falling over themselves to do it. So that type of intrinsic motivation is important there. Increased feelings of indispensability. You are so important to us. Without you, we would be nothing. So indispensability. So training and status system can provide group members with this feeling of having some power, indispensable. Increase performance feedback. Let people know how they're doing. So this constant feedback will ensure that people who are not pulling their weight know about it pretty quick. and reward good performance. So that's, let's praise the positive. And if we can afford get that done, we're going to benefit. We also think about group cohesiveness in terms of increasing it by group-focused methods as opposed to individual. And this is what we call social emotional cohesiveness. So what we're doing here is, instead of focusing on one person, this group back here was really focused on, this is what we're going to do to each and every individual. This is more of a group focus. So keep the group relatively small, strive for favorable public image of the group to increase the status, encourage interaction, cooperation, emphasize characteristics common, what we got in common. Point out the environment, the threats in particular. The competitors are coming to get us. We need to do better. Regularly update on the group's goal. How far along are we? Where are we? How close are we? Give every group member a vital piece of the action. Make sure everyone has a good reason to be there. Channel each group member's special talents. So again, find out who does what and make sure that those skills are put to use. Recognize and equitably reinforce every member's contributions, and frequently remind group members they need one another in order to get the job done, which is a common type of strategy. So kind of like, in summary of all this, we got to think about, okay, we've looked at groups and we say, okay, here are some of the things. So in summary, we really need to work hard to put work teams together in order to make this work. So group effectiveness occurs best when we put a good bit of effort into thinking about the group, getting the group to work well. So if we can think about that before we assemble the group, all the better. So a work group is most effective when its physical and intellectual output is acceptable to management and to other parts of the organization that use the output. Make sure management is involved up front, sets clear expectations. Group members need to be satisfied rather than frustrated by the group. Okay, positive experience. And when the group's experience enables members to continue to work together. The very, very last thing that we looked at in this, that's talked about in here, is this idea of virtual teams. And man, we're living in a world of virtual teams now. This pandemic has certainly shown the ability and the resilience of people to work together in a team without physically having to be together. It poses some challenges, but with technology, we can do it. Zoom is the go-to model now for virtual teams. And we're using this Teams, the program we're using here now is Microsoft Teams, which is a competitor to Zoom, but it's exactly the same thing. And over the last 10 years, that's really come. And over the last year, these companies have really focused on using these tools. So if we got the computer and the technology, we should be able to do the team work the same in there. And what are some of the advantages? Well, you can work around the clock. You can work globally, different time zones. No travel costs, no problems with getting people from point A to point B. You got a larger talent pool to draw on, so you look for the skills in a bigger group. Problem is that you don't necessarily build this trust, and the biggest problem I find in this world is isolation. Here you are by yourself, talking into the ether, right? It could have a high cost. The initial setup cost tends to be high. And there's obviously some management issues. How do you control a team that you're not dealing with? I can't see you. How do I know you're working? So those are some of the things. In order to make it work, best things, train people, make it personalized, get to know one another, that sort of thing. Set clear goals, really no different than a regular team. So bottom line is, teams, they're good. They're not a panacea. They have some challenges. Putting in that team structure. The world we live in North America may not lend itself to teams. We tend to be very individually focused. So as a result, a team may not be good for individuals. So we need to recognize and design teams so that individuals get recognized.